Here is a question worth sitting with before we go any further. What if the most powerful being in the universe, the one who spoke light into darkness, who hung every star in its place, who breathed life into dust and called it human, decided to show up in the most powerless way imaginable, not in a palace, not with armies, not with thunder and fanfare and the kind of entrance that makes empires take notice, but as a baby, in a barn, in a backwater town, to a young woman nobody had heard of, in a corner of the world that Rome considered barely worth governing. That is where Matthew begins. And once you see what Matthew is doing, once you catch the pattern woven through every chapter, every parable, every miracle, every confrontation, you will never read it the same way again. Because Matthew is not just telling you the story of Jesus. Matthew is showing you something that turns the entire human value system completely upside down. And he does it on purpose. From the very first line, this is the story of the kingdom nobody expected. Let us start somewhere that most people skip, the genealogy. You know the one, the long list of names at the very beginning of Matthew that many readers are tempted to skim past on their way to the good stuff. But here is the thing, the genealogy is the good stuff. It is one of the most quietly radical things Matthew does in the entire book. In the ancient world, genealogies were about establishing legitimacy. You listed your ancestors to prove you came from the right people, the noble people, the pure people. A proper royal genealogy was supposed to be a hall of heroes, great men, faithful women, an unblemished line of honor from point A to point B. Matthew gives us something entirely different. He traces Jesus' family line back through Abraham and David. Yes, those are the respectable names, the ones that would make any Jewish reader nod with approval. But then Matthew does something extraordinary. He includes women, which was already unusual for a genealogy of this era. And not just any women. He includes Tamar, who disguised herself as a prostitute to secure what was rightfully hers. He includes Rahab, an actual prostitute from Jericho, a Canaanite woman who sheltered Israelite spies. He includes Ruth, a Moabite outsider, a foreigner from a people the Israelites had complicated history with. He includes Bathsheba, referred to only as Uriah's wife, which is Matthew's way of keeping the scandal of David's adultery and arranged murder in full view, not quietly tucked away. And then there is Mary, an unmarried young woman, pregnant before the wedding, living in a culture where that fact alone could get you killed. This is the family tree of the Son of God. Do you see what Matthew is doing before Jesus has even been born? He is already rewriting the rules of who belongs. He is already telling you that God's story does not flow only through the morally pristine, the racially pure, the socially powerful. It flows through the broken and the foreign and the scandalous and the ordinary. The kingdom that Jesus will spend his entire ministry describing. Matthew is already putting its fingerprints on the genealogy page. This is the first reversal. Now the birth itself. Matthew tells us Jesus is born in Bethlehem, not Jerusalem, not Rome, not in any city of consequence. Bethlehem was so small and so overlooked that the prophet Micah, writing centuries earlier, had to almost apologize for it. You, Bethlehem, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come a ruler. Even the prophecy acknowledges the absurdity. The ruler of the world will come from the tiny place. The King of Kings will arrive in the place everyone else is leaving. And look at who comes to find him first. Matthew doesn't give us shepherds at the manger. That's Luke's account. Matthew gives us magi, wise men from the east. Astronomers, scholars, probably from Persia or Babylon. They are Gentiles, non-Jews, pagan stargazers from a foreign empire who have noticed something in the sky and followed it all the way to a house in Bethlehem with gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. Think about the irony of this for a moment. The religious experts are in Jerusalem, right? The chief priests and the teachers of the law. The people who have devoted their entire lives to studying the scriptures that predict exactly this moment. They are minutes away. And they are not the ones kneeling before the child. It is the outsiders who traveled hundreds of miles who get there first. The ones who weren't supposed to know, they knew. The ones who were supposed to be ready, they had to be told by foreigners. The second reversal. And then there is Herod. When the Magi arrive in Jerusalem asking, "Where is the child born to be king of the Jews?" Matthew tells us something striking. Herod was troubled. And not just Herod. All of Jerusalem was troubled with him. The political power structure felt the threat instantly, even in the birth of an infant. Earthly power always recognizes the arrival of something greater than itself. And its instinctive response is never celebration. It is elimination. Herod's massacre of the children in Bethlehem, this horrifying episode, is not just a historical tragedy. It is Matthew showing us that the kingdom Jesus brings and the kingdoms of this world are fundamentally incompatible. You cannot serve both. And the powers that run this world know it, even when they cannot articulate it. They just know that this child is a threat. But God moves the chess pieces before Herod can. Joseph, warned in a dream, takes Mary and the child to Egypt. They become refugees. The Son of God becomes a displaced person in a foreign country. Another reversal. The one who owns everything has nowhere safe to sleep. After Herod's death, they return, not to Jerusalem, not to the center of power, but to Nazareth, in Galilee, a region the religious establishment in Jerusalem looked down on. Jesus would grow up not in the halls of learning, not near the temple, not among the powerful. He would grow up in the north, in a working-class town, in a carpenter's house, surrounded by people the sophisticated South called Galileans, with a certain sneer in the word. And this matters enormously. Because when Jesus begins his ministry, he does not begin it by introducing himself to the high priest. He begins it by walking down to the Jordan River to be baptized by a strange man who lives in the desert and eats locusts. John the Baptist. This is a figure worth pausing on. John is the forerunner, the one Isaiah predicted would prepare the way. And his message is not comfort, it is confrontation. When the religious leaders of Jerusalem come out to the Jordan to see what all the fuss is about, John does not roll out the welcome mat. He calls them a brood of snakes. He tells them that their genealogy, their connection to Abraham, means nothing if it isn't producing fruit, that the axe is already at the root of the trees. John is reversing the religious status quo before Jesus has even begun preaching. He is telling the certified, credentialed, institutionally validated spiritual leaders of Israel, you think you're in? You might be the most out of anyone here. And then Jesus arrives at the river. And here is something remarkable. John resists. He says, I need to be baptized by you, and you are coming to me? And Jesus says something that sounds simple, but carries enormous weight. Let it be so now. It is proper for us to do this to fulfill all righteousness. Jesus, the Son of God, the one John just acknowledged is his superior, insists on identifying with the people coming to the river for repentance. He stands in line with sinners. He goes under the water with the ordinary and the broken and the seeking. He does not maintain a holy distance. He wades in, and as he comes up from the water, the heavens open and the Father's voice comes. This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. God confirms his Son's identity at the moment of his most human act of solidarity, not at a coronation, not on a throne, dripping wet from a river, surrounded by the repentant masses. Third reversal. Immediately after this, the Spirit leads Jesus into the desert to be tempted by the devil for 40 days. And the three temptations Matthew records are not random. They are targeted precisely at the things that would make sense for a Messiah to do by human logic. Turn stones into bread. Use your power to meet your own needs. Jump from the temple and let angels catch you. Use your power to impress people into believing. Take all the kingdoms of the world. Use your power to rule by force. Jesus refuses all three. Every time, he responds with scripture about trust, about worship, about dependence on the Father, rather than self-reliance. The temptations are essentially offering Jesus a shortcut. Here is how to be a successful king without the hard road. And Jesus says no, not because he cannot do those things, but because the kingdom he is bringing does not run on those principles. This sets up everything that follows. When Jesus begins preaching in Galilee, not Jerusalem, remember, Galilee, he does something nobody expects from a rabbi. He walks along the lake shore and recruits fishermen. Not scholars, not young men with theological credentials, men with nets and calloused hands and boats smelling of fish. Follow me, he says, and I will make you fishers of people. And they leave everything immediately and follow him. The people who will carry his message to the world are not the experts. They are the ones the experts ignored. Fourth reversal. And then comes the moment that is perhaps the most radical document in human history. The Sermon on the Mount. Jesus goes up on a hillside, sits down, the posture of a rabbi about to teach authoritatively, and he begins with a series of declarations that must have sounded absolutely impossible to everyone listening. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Blessed are the merciful. Blessed are the pure in heart. Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness. These are the Beatitudes. And you have to understand what the word blessed carried in that culture. This was not a gentle encouragement, a kind pat on the back. Blessed meant, this person is in the favor of God. This person has divine approval. This person is on the winning side of the universe. And Jesus assigns that divine approval to precisely the people the world had written off. The poor in spirit, the ones who have nothing left to bring. The mourning, the ones crushed by grief. The meek, the ones who have been taught by life not to push themselves forward. The ones who are desperate for righteousness rather than satisfied with their own performance. The merciful, not the powerful. The pure in heart, not the religiously credentialed. The peacemakers, not the warriors. The persecuted, not the celebrated. Jesus is not telling these people, hang in there, things will get better eventually. He is saying, right now, as things are, you are blessed. The kingdom already belongs to you. Not in spite of your weakness. In it. Through it. Because of it. This is not a reversal of one thing. It is the reversal of the entire human ledger. Every category by which the ancient world, and honestly, our modern world too, sorted people into winners and losers gets completely inverted, and Jesus announces it not as a distant hope but as a present reality. Then he keeps going. He says his followers are salt and light, which means their identity comes first and their influence follows from that identity, not the other way around. He talks about the law and says he has not come to abolish it but to fulfill it. And then he takes the commandments and deepens them to the level of the heart. Don't just avoid murder. Deal with your anger. Don't just avoid adultery. Deal with your lust. Don't just avoid false oaths. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. The external performance of religion is not enough. God is after the interior, and when he teaches his followers to pray, he gives them something that would have felt almost shockingly intimate in a Jewish religious context. He tells them to call God Father, not the Holy One, not the Almighty, though he is both of those things. Father, a term of relationship, of nearness, of belonging. The God of the universe wants to be addressed the way a child addresses the one who loves them most. He tells them not to worry, and this is not motivational speaking. It is a theological claim. If the Father feeds the birds and clothes the wildflowers with beauty more stunning than anything Solomon ever wore, then the Father sees you. The Father knows your needs before you ask. Worrying is not just anxious. It is, in a strange way, faithless. It treats God as absent or unconcerned when he is neither. He tells them not to judge, and the image he uses is magnificent. You are trying to remove a speck of dust from your friend's eye, while you have a wooden beam sticking out of your own. The self-righteousness that positions itself as helpfully corrective is, actually, a form of blindness. See yourself clearly first. Then, maybe, you can help someone else see. And he closes the sermon with the image that has echoed through 2,000 years of Christian thought: the wise man who builds on rock and the foolish man who builds on sand. The storm comes for everyone. The difference is what you built on before the storm arrived. And what you build on, he says, is whether or not you hear these words and put them into practice. Not whether you heard them. Not whether you agreed with them. Whether you did them. This is a kingdom of action rooted in transformation, not of performance rooted in appearance. As Jesus moves through Galilee, Matthew records miracle after miracle. And again, the pattern of reversal runs through all of them. A leper comes to him. In that culture, lepers were the ultimate outsiders, ritually unclean, socially exiled, required to announce their own contamination to anyone who came near. Jesus does not keep the safe distance the law technically permitted. He reaches out and touches the man. He makes contact with the untouchable. and the leprosy disappears. A Roman centurion, a commander in the occupying army, the very face of the foreign power that Israel chafed under, comes to Jesus asking for his servant to be healed. And this Gentile officer, this representative of Rome, demonstrates a depth of faith that Jesus says he has not found in all of Israel. I have not found anyone in Israel with such great faith. The insider lacks what the outsider possesses. Again, Matthew, the tax collector. Tax collectors in first-century Judea were despised, not just because of taxes, but because they worked for Rome and often cheated their own people. They were collaborators and extortionists, considered by the religious community to be spiritually disqualified. Jesus walks past Matthew's tax booth, looks at him, and says two words, "Follow me," and Matthew gets up and follows. That night, Jesus eats at Matthew's house with a crowd of tax collectors and sinners, the socially and spiritually disreputable. When the Pharisees ask why he eats with such people, Jesus answers with a line that cuts straight to the heart of his entire mission. It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. The qualified, by their own assessment, have no need of him. The unqualified, they know exactly what they need, and he comes for them. The feeding of the 5,000. This miracle sits at the center of Matthew's gospel and carries enormous symbolic weight. A massive crowd has followed Jesus out to a remote place. Evening comes, and the disciples, sensibly, logically, tell Jesus to send the people away to find food in nearby villages. Jesus says, "You give them something to eat." They count what they have. 5 loaves of bread, 2 fish, nowhere near enough. The math does not work. And Jesus takes the nowhere near enough, looks up to heaven, blesses it, breaks it, and starts distributing it through the disciples' hands. And 5,000 men, plus women and children, eat until they are satisfied. And there are 12 baskets of leftovers. More at the end than there was at the beginning. Scarcity, in the hands of Jesus, becomes abundance. What is insufficient in human accounting becomes more than enough in kingdom economy. This is not just a miracle about food. It is a statement about the nature of the kingdom, that its resources do not work by the same rules as ours. Shortly afterward comes the moment that is perhaps the most humanly relatable scene in all of Matthew. Peter walking on water. Jesus has sent the disciples ahead in the boat and gone up on a mountainside alone to pray. A storm has hit the lake. The boat is being battered, and Jesus comes to them, walking on the water. They are terrified. He calls out to them, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." Peter, impulsive, passionate, never quite thinking before acting, says, "Lord, if it is you, tell me to come to you on the water." Jesus says, "Come." And Peter gets out of the boat. He is actually doing it, walking on water, until he looks at the wind and the waves and the reality of what is happening around him, and he begins to sink. "Lord, save me." Jesus reaches out immediately, catches him, and says gently, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" This scene is beloved because it is so deeply honest about the human experience of faith. Faith is not the absence of fear or doubt. Faith is getting out of the boat anyway. Faith is the step taken when everything visible says, "This is impossible." And when the visible overwhelms the faith, when Peter sinks, Jesus does not lecture him from the safety of the surface. He reaches down and lifts him up. The response to failing faith is not condemnation. It is a hand. Fifth reversal. As Jesus moves toward Jerusalem, and the conflict with the religious authorities intensifies, he tells a parable that may be the most offensive thing he ever said to people who believed they were doing everything right. The parable of the workers in the vineyard. A landowner goes out in the morning and hires workers for a full day's wage. Then at 9, at noon, at 3, and even at 5 in the afternoon, he goes back and hires more workers, telling each group he will pay them what is fair. At the end of the day, he pays everyone the same, starting with the ones hired last. The all-day workers, reasonably, expect more. They get the same, and they are furious. These last workers worked only 1 hour, and you made them equal to us who worked all day in the scorching sun. And the landowner says something extraordinary. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Are you envious because I am generous? This parable is deeply, deliberately offensive to our sense of fairness, and that offense is the whole point. The kingdom of heaven does not operate on the principle of people getting exactly what they earned and no more. It operates on something, the formal word for which is grace. Unearned, undeserved, extravagant generosity that the people who think they have earned the most will always find hardest to celebrate. The workers who resent the latecomers' equal pay are not wrong about the fairness calculus. They are wrong about what economy they are operating in. The last will be first. The first will be last. Jesus says this so often in Matthew that it functions almost like a recurring chorus, the theme of the whole symphony. It is not a consolation prize for losing. It is a description of how the kingdom actually works. And then the confrontations in Jerusalem. Jesus enters the city not on a war horse but on a donkey, a deliberate fulfillment of the prophet Zechariah's vision of a humble king. The crowds go wild, laying their coats and palm branches in the road, shouting, "Hosanna to the Son of David." The religious leaders are offended. Even the children in the temple are shouting praises. And when the chief priests demand, Jesus silenced them. He quotes the Psalms. "From the lips of children and infants, you have ordained praise." Even the children understand something the theologians have missed. Jesus cleanses the temple, turning over the tables of the money changers, and quotes Isaiah. "My house will be called a house of prayer, but you are making it a den of robbers." Then he heals the blind and lame right there in the temple courts. The holy space, he says, is for encounter with God. Not transaction, not institution, encounter. And then comes a chapter of confrontation, in which the religious leaders try, one after another, to trap Jesus in his words. About taxes, about resurrection, about the greatest commandment. And he answers each question in a way that silences his opponents and reveals how differently his thinking runs from theirs. When they ask about the greatest commandment, he answers simply and completely. Love God with everything you have and are, and love your neighbor as yourself. Every law and every prophet hangs on those two things. Strip away everything else, the rituals, the regulations, the institutional structures, and this is what remains: love. Love directed upward and love directed outward. And then, the shadow of the cross begins to fall across the narrative. In Gethsemane, the garden on the Mount of Olives, we see something that no human writer could have invented, and no human theology would have predicted. Jesus, the Son of God, on his face in the dirt, praying, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me." This is not performance. This is the full weight of what is coming pressing down on a human heart. He knows what the cross means. He is not stoically indifferent to it. He is anguished. He comes back to find his closest friends asleep. 3 times he prays. 3 times he returns to sleeping disciples. And at the end of it, he rises with a decision. "Yet not as I will, but as you will." Power choosing to be surrendered. The one who could have called 12 legions of angels, choosing to let the mob take him. This is the deepest reversal of all. This is what everything has been building toward. When Judas arrives with the armed crowd and betrays Jesus with a kiss, the most intimate gesture turned into the sharpest betrayal. Jesus says to his betrayer, "Friend," not enemy, not traitor, friend. Even now, even in this moment, the categories of the kingdom hold. He is arrested. His disciples flee. Peter, who swore he would die before denying Jesus, denies him 3 times before the rooster crows, exactly as Jesus said he would. And then Peter goes out and weeps bitterly. The bravest disciple could not hold it together. The one who walked on water sank again. The trial is a farce. The charges are false. Pilate himself cannot find what crime Jesus has committed. His wife sends him a message, saying she has had nightmares about this innocent man. Pilate asks the crowd, "Which prisoner shall I release? Barabbas the terrorist, or Jesus?" The crowd chooses Barabbas. Pilate washes his hands. Jesus is handed over to be flogged and crucified. At the cross, the soldiers mock him. The passers-by taunt him. The religious leaders sneer. He saved others, but he can't save himself. If he is the Son of God, let him come down from the cross. And the devastating, the unbearable irony is this: he could. That is precisely what makes the cross what it is. The power is there. The capability is there. And he does not use it. Not because he cannot, but because this is why he came. At noon, darkness falls across the land for 3 hours. Creation itself goes dark as its creator dies, and then Jesus cries out in Aramaic, Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani? My God, why have you forsaken me? He is quoting Psalm 22, the great psalm of the suffering righteous one, who calls out in desolation and is ultimately vindicated by God. And then he dies. The curtain of the temple tears in two from top to bottom. The barrier between God and humanity removed in the same moment the Son of God breathes his last. An earthquake shakes the ground. Tombs open, and a Roman soldier, a Gentile, an outsider, a man with no religious credentials, looks at what he has just witnessed and says, "Surely this man was the Son of God." Again, the insider misses it, and the outsider gets it. It looks like the end. The disciples are scattered and afraid. Joseph of Arimathea takes the body and buries it in his own new tomb. A stone is rolled across the entrance. Guards are posted. The chief priests and Pharisees have won. The tomb is sealed. The movement is over. And then, early on Sunday morning, as the first light begins to touch the horizon, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary go to the tomb. Matthew says a strong earthquake struck, and an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and rolled the stone away. Not to let Jesus out, notice, because he was already gone, but to let the women in to see what was no longer there. The angel's face is like lightning, his clothes white as snow. The guards faint with fear, and the angel says to the women, "Do not be afraid. I know you are looking for Jesus, who was crucified. He is not here. He has risen, just as he said. He is not here. He has risen." 2,000 years later, those words still carry the force of a detonation, because what happened that morning was not merely a miracle among miracles. It was the ultimate reversal. The reversal that all the others were pointing toward. Death, the final word that every human being has ever lived under, the ceiling that no one escapes, the door that opens only one way. In the resurrection of Jesus, death was defeated, not avoided, defeated. He went through it and came out the other side alive, and the exit he made out of death is an exit that remains open. Matthew closes with the risen Jesus meeting his 11 disciples on a mountain in Galilee, back in the north, back in the land the establishment dismissed, and giving them the commission that has shaped 2,000 years of history. "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always, to the very end of the age." All authority, not some. Not authority over spiritual matters, while earthly kingdoms keep their own domain. All authority, in heaven and on earth, given to the man who arrived in a manger in a backwater town, who recruited fishermen and tax collectors, who blessed the poor and the mourning and the meek, who touched lepers and ate with sinners, who died between two criminals, and who walked out of his own grave. The last reversal contains all the others. The one who descended became the one who ascended. The one who was killed became the one who gives life. The one who was condemned became the one who commissions. The one who had nowhere to lay his head received all authority in heaven and on earth. And notice who he sends. Not the powerful, not the credentialed, not the ones who kept it together through the whole ordeal. They all fled, remember. He sends the broken ones, the restored ones, the ones who denied him and wept, the ones who doubted even as they worshipped on that mountain. Matthew tells us honestly that some doubted, right there in the presence of the risen Jesus. He sends them anyway. He always sends the ones the world would not have chosen. This is the pattern that runs through every single chapter of Matthew, from the scandalous genealogy to the glorious commission. Jesus consistently, deliberately, and tenderly chose the wrong people, blessed the wrong people, healed the wrong people, ate with the wrong people, died among the wrong people, and then rose to send the wrong people to change the world. Wrong by every human standard, right by every kingdom standard. And here is what that means for you, sitting with this today. If you have ever felt like you were on the wrong side of the line, too broken to be useful, too sinful to be loved, too ordinary to matter, too far gone to come back, then Matthew's gospel is written for you. Not as a distant theological document about events that happened long ago in a land far away, but as a living announcement that the kingdom of heaven has always had room for exactly the kind of person you are. The Beatitudes did not bless the strong. They blessed the ones running on empty. The disciples were not impressive. They were available. The sinners and tax collectors did not clean themselves up before Jesus ate with them. They just came to the table. The women at the tomb did not understand the resurrection before they arrived. They just showed up in the dark with spices and grief and love, and they were the first ones to hear the news that changed everything. The kingdom of heaven is not a reward for the worthy. It is a gift to the seeking. It is not a club for the qualified. It is a family for the ones who come home. Jesus said it plainly, in one of the most beautiful and demanding invitations ever spoken. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Weary, burdened, those are the ones he calls, not the ones who have it figured out, the ones who are tired of carrying what they were never meant to carry, alone. The kingdom nobody expected is still standing. The upside-down economy of grace is still running. The reversals that Jesus announced on that hillside in Galilee are still the operating principles of the reality he inaugurated. The last are still becoming first. The humble are still being lifted. The broken are still being made whole. The dead, in every sense of that word, are still being raised to life. And the stone is still rolled away. That tomb is still empty. And the risen Jesus is still saying to every person who shows up in the dark with nothing but need and longing, and whatever fragile, flickering faith they can manage, do not be afraid. He is not here. He has risen. Just as he said, go and tell someone.